Welcome guys, in this part we are going to create a real world GitHub users application. We are going to fetch data from the GitHub API and render a list of users and create routing, create a master and detail page for the users. So we are going to create an application wherein we get the data from the GitHub API and which gives the list of the users like this. It's very simple, api.github.com/users. It gives an array of GitHub users, which gives us these things. So we'll show them in the UI, and when you click on one of those items, we'll navigate the user to another route and we'll fetch more detailed information of that user using this API. So let's start with it. I've cleaned up my app.js component like this, and right now it looks like this. So here we are going to render our users list component. So we are going to create a users list component. Let me go inside src and create a components folder, and inside this I'm going to create my first component as users list.jsx. So you can name the extension as either JS or JSX, but JSX make it more explicit. So the first thing I'm going to do is import React from React. This is a very first step that you're going to do. And then you are going to create one function component called as users list, which accept props, but we don't need any props, so it's okay to leave it blank. And here we are going to render our users list. So in order to render that, let's first create a state variable, a local state variable, which will hold an array of the users list, which will populate once we get the data back from the GitHub API. So the way we do that is by const users / set users. These are the two things that are returned from the use state hook, and it gets imported like this. Okay, let me merge this here. Yep, and let me initialize this with a blank array. So now that I've initialized this thing with a blank array, so I can use the users variable and map it. So it's an array, and a map operation on an array returns a new array, and here we want to map it to the JSX that we want to return. So for each entry that we are getting here like this, so for each entry we will use the data and use it to render our JSX. So that's the beauty of JSX, which makes it really popular, because we can write all our logic while rendering. So for example, it'll be like user, and I can straight away return the JSX, something like div let's use one of its attribute, which is login, which represents the username, by the way, like this. So right now it's just a blank array, it does nothing, so it won't render anything, but when it gets populated we'll see the render. But as of now, just let's reference this component inside our app component from ./component/users list, and just beneath it I'll refer it like this. So so we are here. Let's move ahead and let's make an API call to the GitHub remote server. And you guessed it right, we will be, since making an API call, making a network call is a side effect, so you should always do that side effect inside the use effect hook that's provided by React. So I'll import it, and here I'll make a fetch call to the URL that we have as API github/users, and since this is a promise, I'll write then, and I'll get the I'll get the response as a promise and a response object, and by calling response.json it will convert that thing into. So here we get this response object, and on that response object we have this JSON method, which basically parses the JSON and convert it into JavaScript object so that we can use it. So once we have got the data in the form of JavaScript objects, which is an array of objects here. In this case, it will be like this. And if I simply now just put a log here, we'll get to see the data. Okay, by the way, this is not exporting anything, so we missed on that. Let me export it, and let's see what we have here. So it's showing nothing because we haven't rendered anything because of the blank array. So here you can see we are getting list of 30 GitHub users, right? Each of them has these attributes. So this is an array of objects that we now want to map to the JSX, to the visual elements that will show up on our page. So let's go ahead and do that. So here all I want to do is set my users state variable. So the way I can do that is by using set users to users. Now before setting here, most of the time we have this thing wherein the way you are getting data from the backend would not be aligned with the way you want to show it on the UI. So for example, you might want to perform some transformations, like maybe append something to something, just like the way we saw in our previous example, wherein we wanted to convert something to uppercase or lowercase. Or maybe you don't like the name of the keys here. So for example, login needs to be a user ID, right? Or a GitHub handle. It could be named more it'll be more relevant that way. So for example, you might want to change the name of the keys, like login here is not very much clear. So maybe you want to change it to, let's say, username or user ID. So all that stuff you can do here before putting the state into that variable into our user state. So but anyway, for the sake of simplicity, we'll keep it like that. And here now, since we have our users, so initially it will be blank array, and the next time when we do the set state, when we perform the set state operation, this will get updated and it will trigger a re-render, and that's when this users thing will be populated. And here we can now use it to render our list. So as you can see, we are now getting a list of user IDs. So if you see here, it's a div and it's been getting repeated. Now one thing you have to notice is React is throwing a warning which is saying each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Now when you are rendering such a list, React needs to maintain some identity of each item in the JSX. So you have to provide some key. So mostly it's some unique identifier that you are getting from the data, or if you don't find that, what you can do is you can have something like this, user and index, and you can provide index as a key, although that's an anti-pattern, but it should be used only in the way when you are rendering static list and you don't have to perform an add or delete operation. If you have to perform add and delete operation, make sure you make some unique key in the data itself. So this is a better way to do that. So an ID, for example, is a unique key. So the ID 4 won't match ID 5, so it will always be unique. So or you can treat even the login, which is the username of the users, because that also is going to be unique, so you can use it that way. So let's go ahead and add some more information in our JSX besides this thing. Something like paragraph tag. Let me put username is this, and let's have the image tag, and let's have the avatar URL. So for example, this property here, which is avatar URL, is holding our user image, so we'll put it here, and provide some alternate text for accessibility reasons, like user.login. So this is how you can pass props. And Let's add some more information if we have any. So this belongs to the GitHub URL, so we can do something like p GitHub link, and we can make an anchor tag here. The text inside will be, let's put it as the GitHub handle of that user, and the href will be the user.url. So let's see how it looks now. So you see the warning is gone, and we are getting each item as the username, the image, and the GitHub link. So if I click here now, it will take me to the, okay, it's taking to the GitHub API. Rather, we want to take it to the HTML. So instead of URL, let's do HTML URL. Yes. So now let me go back. Now we have this. If I click here now it will take us again to the, there's something wrong here. I think it's not updated. Yep. So far we have created a list of users that looks like this, and we'll look at styling in the next part. But let's do a little more refactoring. Here we are just learning how to create components and how to view everything in the component perspective. So this users list can be seen as one component, right? And each item in the list is a repetitive pattern, right? So maybe you can extract this out into a separate component whose job will be to render just one single user item. So let's go ahead and do that. So inside the components, I'll create another component called as user item. Let's say user item.jsx, and again we'll start with importing React from React. So export default function user item, let's name it for the purpose of debugging. And here we are just going to return what we are putting in the map here, which is this. So I'm taking this thing out and putting it here. So I'm delegating the responsibility of render one particular user item to a new component itself, whose sole responsibility will be to just do that. And here I don't need to provide a key. I'll have to provide a key when I'll use this component. So for example, what I mean is user list, user item, and I can import it now. It has been imported like this. So it's a VS Code feature. And I'll have to provide a key here now, which is, let's say, user.id or user.login, anything you can use. And besides this, we'll have to feed this component some data. In order to render the user, we'll have to provide the user first. So we can do something like, we can pass a prop like a data or anything you like, but you have to make sure we pass the user object to it. So inside this, we'll accept the props argument, and the props argument will now hold our data. So instead of using user.login, we'll have to use data.property name. So instead of doing this every time, let's destructure it right away. It's an ES6 pattern wherein we can extract the properties from object by just doing this. So yep, seems like we are set. So this data.avatar URL we no longer need, and we can directly reference these properties like this. And now if I save both of them, things should still behave the same. Okay, so seems like we didn't pass it. Okay, so here from the data property we want to extract these out. So that's what went wrong here, and now it is rendering in the same way as earlier. Okay, so let's go a step further. Also let's add a border here. So we can add a border, we can stylize HTML elements just like this. So inside the style element we can pass an object. Now in order to pass an object which is not a string, you'll have to enclose it in these braces, and I can pass things like border 1 pixel solid and black. So if I see it now, there'll be a border around every item. Okay, and maybe we can add a maximum height of 150 pixels to each of the avatar images, and so that they all look consistent now. So okay, we have reached here now. Now let's introduce routing in our component. When we click on one of those, the route should change and we should get navigated to something like user/username, and it should load the detail of only that particular user. So let's do that. So the way to implement routing in React is through React Router DOM, and this is a library that is built solely for this purpose. So we'll have to install this first by using npm install React Router DOM. So we'll go into the root of our project and we'll do npm install React Router DOM. And once we install that, the way to use it is like this. So we import these things inside our root component most of the time, and here we'll add the imported stuff, which goes like this. So we are importing the router, we are importing a switch, and we are importing a route. So we'll see how this works. So when this app loads, we are directly rendering our users list component, but rather we want to put it under the route. We want to associate it only with a route. So we'll start here. So we'll put a router object here. So this is a declarative way of creating a router and associating components. And inside this we'll write a switch, just like you write a switch case in your program in JavaScript or in other programming language. Same way we have to write a switch case against a path and the component is going to render. So each switch case has a route, has multiple routes in it, and we have to specify path here and the component that we want to render here. So the component that we want to render, we'll have to pass the component factory rather than rendering the component right away, because route internally will instantiate it and from this component factory and render it when it encounters this slash path thing. And also let's duplicate it now. So when the path is user/user ID. So what we are doing here is we want to add some dynamic aspect to that route. So for example, if I'm logging on to this first user, if I'm looking for this first user which has this login ID of Mohombo, so this will get passed like this, in our route, and then we'll extract this information from the route in our detail component that we are going to write now, and make an API call using that. So in order to do that, let's create our component first. Let's say user details component, and we'll have to import it, assuming we will create it here, user details. And yeah, let's create a component now, user details dot jsx. Okay, same steps as earlier, import React from React and export default user details, and Inside here we'll render our user details component, details, okay, for now. And let's see whether it works right now or not with whatever we have written so far. So by default, when the app renders, it will be, oops, I missed the function keyword. Yeah. So here we can see on the home page, we are getting the users list component rendered. And if I type anything after that, we are still getting the users list component. And let's see our other route that we had, /user/ I'm putting my handle name. Let's see what happens here. And still we are getting the users list component. Why is that? Because here when we specify a path, the way it works is that either slash, it's like a fuzzy thing. So either slash or anything coming after that would be matched here, and this users list component is being getting rendered. So in order to avoid that only when exactly slash is there, we want to render component user list. We can control that by using this, and let's see the effect now. So right now, as you can tell, my path is /user/paramsingvc, so it's now rendering our detailed component. And let's put something else here. So it doesn't render anything because now we are not redirecting it to slash, or we are not looking at it because this doesn't match here. So that's why it's not rendering anything. Only when it is a clear slash and nothing is after that, only then it will render our home user list component. All right, so let's move further and let's go to this user detail component, and let's try to grab this dynamic param that we are trying to pass here. So the way to do that is very easy nowadays with React Router DOM. It is exposing something called as this use params hook, which is available here. So we can import it like this, import use params from React Router DOM, and very easily we can grab the route params out of it. So the route param was user ID, and let's see if we are able to get it or not. User ID, so /user/paramsingvc, and yes, we are able to get whatever we pass in here, right? Anything we'll pass, we'll be able to get here by virtue of this hook. Now let's accomplish what we want to do with this particular component. We want to make an API call pertaining to get the information of a given user ID from the GitHub API. So the way to do that, again, it's a side effect. You guessed it right. We are going to use the use effect hook. Let's import it first, and on the component mount, when the component gets rendered for the very first time on our screen, we want to make an API call, and that API call looks like this. So it is this way, and there's a dynamic parameter, so I'm using the template literal notation of ES6, and here I can pass the user ID parameter that I just got from the param. So let's see what happens. Again, whatever JSON response I'm getting, I need to parse it into, I need to perform JSON.parse on it so that it can be converted into the JavaScript object, and then I will need to set the state, but let's say we are just consoling it for the moment, and let's see what happens. So okay, so we are able to get our information from the API call that we just made. So this is the API call, and it is giving us the data back. This is giving all my information, my bio, my followers, my stars, my following, everything. So one critical thing to note here is that it's always a good practice to, in the dependencies array, to put all the dependencies that we are using inside the callback. Now what this means is that, so here we have been lucky enough that that user ID was able to be procured just before this callback was being run. So we are getting a deterministic user ID because this is apparently a synchronous operation. But there could be cases wherein this user ID might not be available when we are running this use effect. So it's always a good practice to put whatever dynamic parameters we are using outside the scope of this callback to put it here. And in fact, if you don't put it, React will also give you a warning. So maybe we might have been getting a warning here. As you can see, this is the warning I'm talking about. It says React hook use effect has a missing dependency user ID. Either include it or remove the dependency array. So we are assuming that we'll get the updated user ID, but we have to make sure that we get the updated one. So this use effect runs every time when we run this user, when any change happens to this user ID. So that's why we have to make sure we make it as a part of this dependency array, right? So now this warning will go, right? Okay, now we are good to go. Now we just need to render this information. So let's say I take out my avatar URL here. Let's take some help from the user item component that we made earlier. And okay, let me copy this. Okay, so we need to first of all maintain a state variable, const user and set user equals to use state, and we'll initialize it with a null, and we will render it using user dot login user dot avatar URL. We'll prefix the properties that we are assuming here with user dot, and let's see. So we won't be able to see anything. Why? Because you see here, cannot read property login of null. Why? Because you see this is an asynchronous operation, and by the time this call, by the way, we haven't updated our state here, so let me do that. This dot, oh, I'm sorry, set user to user, and this could result in naming collision, so let me change it to some other name. Okay, let's see now what happens. So we are getting this error. Why? Because it says cannot read login of null, cannot read anything of null. So it's just a fatal error returned at the first error it got. So why is it happening? Because we are initializing our user to null, and only when this AJAX call, which is an asynchronous operation network call, when it resolves, only then we'll update our user object here. So by that time the component is already rendered, and it'll try to do the login operation on the null object. So that's why we have to guard against that thing. So as you can tell, we can apply a conditional statement. We can use this, a very common pattern. So we enclose whatever JSX we want to render in curly brackets and braces, and we can use something like user and. So this is a very common JavaScript conditional flow, wherein we are saying only when the first value is truthy, only then we'll proceed with the following statement. So and also there's a little problem here, so which means that React can't accept multiple JSX elements, so we have to wrap it in something like this inside a root element. So it can only take one root thing it can't take multiple elements at a time. So also, if we don't want to include any unnecessary div thing here, so we can remove it and we can include it like this. So this is called as React Fragment, so which is a React internal construct, but it won't make any changes to the DOM. So let's see what we get now. Yes. So initially when the API call was happening, it was blank, and when the API call succeeded, we got this thing with us. And let's now try to put a ternary operator here. So for example, if the user is present, then render this, or else if the user is not present, maybe we want to have a paragraph here that says loading. Same way here, instead of a string, you can add a actual SVG loader which like rotates with time, an animated loader. So that's how, you know, it works in the production applications. So you saw for a glimpse there was a loading here, and then immediately it was the data got loaded, and we are able to see this information. So now let's add a link here to go back to our home page. The way to do that is, so React Router DOM provides us with a link tag here, link component, which we can write like this, and let's say go back to home, and it accepts one prop called as to, and in there we can pass the path that we want to go to when the user clicks it. So let's see if that works. So it says go back to home. If I click that, now I'm taken to the home page. So now let's link each of these items to their corresponding detail pages. Let's go to the user item component, by the way, this time, and at the root of each element, let's add that link thing, and we can style it also, and let's add the tooling. So it is going to be like user slash the, so it's a dynamic parameter which is present inside the login property, so it should work like this. So let's see what happens. So now, as you can tell, if I click on this, it will take us to the user detail page, and it might misbehave in the sense that now if I click this GitHub link also, it is taking me to the user detail page because the action is now overridden. So the click event is not even reaching here because we are intercepting it right away here. So better would be that instead of applying it to the whole body, we apply it to the one particular section, let's say the profile image. There are other ways to handle this problem as well, but we'll discuss that in another part. And then we remove this styling. So for now we are linking only our image to the detail page so that everything else works fine. Now, yep. And now if I go back, if I click the image now, it'll take me to the detail page, right? So that finishes up with our with our GitHub application. We are displaying a list of users. We created 3 components: user list, user details, and user item. And you can now tell how we can go about creating any application by, you know, breaking it into chunks, moving writing the components one by one, and weaving them together through routing and everything. And we also had a look at in a practical sense, we had a look on how to use these lifecycle methods in the form of hooks. And we also saw some custom hooks exposed by the libraries such as React Router DOM here, like the use params hook, which is performing a side effect basically by grabbing the location object from the address bar and extracting the route params out of it. Congrats guys, we just created our first React application with all the knowledge that we have gained so far. In the coming section, we'll style our application to make it look more appealing using CSS, and we'll see how we can use CSS inside the JSX.